Lawyers of Reddit, what are some of the strangest would it be illegal if I? Questions you have been asked? Another sad one, but during the financial crisis I was asked numerous times whether a family would still get the life insurance payout if the person committed suicide. Client is the subject of a protective order prohibiting him from being within 100 feet of the protected person. He tells me he has a laser rangefinder and makes sure he is complying by taking line of sight measurements of his distance from her, by bouncing the laser off her. I had to tell him that is literally compliant but worse in the mind of the court than just not complying. Please either stop doing that or raise more money to deal with the shitstorm coming when she notices the laser dot on her. Wife got house in the divorce. Husband so, the insurance on the house lapsed. If it just happens to randomly burn down one night she'd end up with nothing, right? Look, I'm not saying I'm going to do anything. I mean crap happens sometimes. There's no way the court would blame me, right? I withdrew from the case shortly after. Another divorce. It's not illegal to just take all the money to the Ukraine, right? I know people in banking there. She'll never find it. Me. We have orders prohibiting you from moving money out of the accounts. Him. Yay. So I get sanctioned. Good luck collecting anything from me. Just as long as it's not prison. I withdrew shortly after. I used to exclusively practice family law. Someone asked me if she could unadopt her kids because she hated them and didn't want to pay child support for them anymore. More of the saddest thing than strangest thing. Strangest thing was a guy asking me if he could sue Campbell's soup because a little bit of the wrapper got in the soup when he was cooking it. Not just a random friend or something. This guy scheduled an appointment with my office, showed up for the appointment, and asked. He was ready to sue. Ugh, that's awful. A few years ago I had a lady ask me if she could get a paternity test for her husband's daughter he'd had with the first wife. The daughter was 17 years old. Years. I don't even do family law, but I'm pretty sure there isn't a court in this country that's going to end his child support for a kid he's acknowledged as his for 17 years. No, you cannot leave the state with your children when you have an open social services case. Yes, you will be arrested if you do so. Kind of a fun one. I do a lot of probate and estate planning, and I had a guy who wanted to know if it would be legal for him to take money and other valuable possessions and then divide them up into a bunch of waterproof metal boxes and bury them in his backyard. It was more of a pasture, 3 or 4 acres. Then, he was going to leave his 3 kids each a metal detector to be given to them at his wake. Whatever they found, they got to keep. Technically, at least in my state, it's legal. That doesn't mean that it's not an absolutely terrible idea. Everyone wants to know the precise limits of self-defense. To the point of, hi, Stormy Lullaby, what do you do for a living? I'm a lawyer. Oh. So if someone called me a butthole and I punched them, would it be self-defense? Every time. Probably the strangest questions relate to fanfiction, though. Not necessarily a would it be illegal if, but I had a buddy from high school recently ask if he could bring charges for supernatural harassment. It's when the cast of Supernatural won't stop harassing you. In my first year of law school, one of the other students in my section asked 3 different professors whether a prostitute could sue you for battery for the sexual contact you paid for. Clearly asking for a friend, a very close friend. There's the old drinking man's DUI avoidance scheme that people ask my wife, who used to be a PD and is now an ADA, about all the time. You're drunk driving and get pulled over by police. The second you get pulled over, you 1. Cut the engine and step out of the car with a full bottle of whiskey. Preferably JD, as the square bottle ensures it hasn't rolled out of reach. 2. Throw your keys far away, preferably in the woods or down a sewer grate. 3. Open and pound the whiskey in front of the officer. In theory, you would only get a public drunkenness as they can't prove you were drunk while driving. You are simply drunk on the side of the road and not in possession of your car. In practice, you're going to jail for DUI, obstruction, and whatever else they decide is appropriate for being a pain in the butt and making it harder to tow your car. A good friend is a lawyer. While we were on a guy's weekend abroad, he got a text, went quiet and texted something back. I asked if it was work related, and yes, It was a client who wanted his lawyer to pass on some information about where the client had hidden his stash. My friend responded simply, "Sorry, I think you understand that I can't do that." The client stupidly thought that the lawyer's confidentiality was a backdoor to using him as a tool in the drug dealing business. In college, my brother and his friends would do some deep thinking on this subject after many hours of drinking. They would then call the police non-emergency line and play Ask an Officer. The best one I remember was, "Is it illegal to eat a dog?" The officer said she didn't know but not to. The next day, brother received numerous calls from different shelters and charities offering to take his dog. My brother didn't own a dog. Well, not after that night's dinner. Okay, so, dude walks into my office with only his shirt covered in blood. Says he needs to speak to any of the lawyers, so they send me. Sits down in conference room, looks straight up at me, raises an eyebrow and says to me, "Is it illegal to stab someone with their consent?" I give him a short answer and half a long answer. He smiles and nods, leaves the room, and passes the receptionist the equivalent of about $40 in cash and leaves. We don't charge for first-time consultations. That's funny. BC, someone asked that same question on Reddit a couple days ago. Wonder if it's the same guy. Not a lawyer but a neighbor of mine went to a lawyer and asked him if he hypothetically murdered his wife and kids, what would his defense be? Lawyer told him that he would go look that up for him. Called the police. Neighbor is now in a mental institution. Clearly the defense would be insanity. At a meeting of companies in a citywide industry to discuss how they should handle increased costs of business and lack of market power, one owner stood up and suggested that they all just agree to raise their prices and all charge the same price, and everyone would keep tabs on everyone else to make sure that no one charges less than that. No, that's criminal price fixing. The Pepsi and Coke bottlers in my city got in trouble a number of years back for that very thing. They paid some fines and nobody got in any real trouble. You know, the usual. A guy in jail charged with driving with a revoked license. This violated his probation. Blames the car impound for giving him the keys to the car after he went and signed to have it released to him. Had to break it to him that he knew his license was revoked and he went and paid and signed to get the car released. Got into the car, started it and drove off. I compare it to the situation where someone blames the victim of a stolen vehicle because they left the keys in the car, thereby inducing them to steal it. SMH. When I was a new lawyer, one of my high school friends was fixated on the idea that by paying a parking meter you were renting that space and could exclude everyone else from it. He wanted to know if he paid for 3 hours on the meter, could he just leave the spot open but get people towed out of it, essentially evicting them. I tried to explain that an eviction isn't just calling up the sheriff and having someone forcibly removed. It's a court case and it takes some time. He kept trying to press me to answer that yeah, you could exclude someone from the spot. Never mind that it's not your property and it's not a leasehold interest in that land. He just wanted me to agree with him. It started out as just kind of a silly question, but I think he was actually a little too tied up with the idea. Law student here. There was a recent case in our country where a guy kidnapped an 8-year-old kid, raped her and then killed her. Had its fair amount of share in the media for quite a while. As the bloodthirsty people we are, immediately people started trends on social media that he should be given to the public. We should torture the frick out of him, etc. Nothing unusual. Then a family relative asked me if it would be legal if we forced the guy to have a sex reassignment surgery and then force him to prostitution so that the money we receive from there could be given to female students. It was obviously one of the easiest fricking no's in my life. It also freaked me out. Luckily the relative then told me that it wasn't her idea but a celebrity suggested it, so she asked just in case. A guy in my concealed carry class was asking a lot of crazy hypotheticals about when he could pull on someone and when he could shoot. One night he brought in a gym bag that had duct tape and zip ties, among other weird stuff, and was asking about the legality of effecting a citizen's arrest and the legality of putting the duct tape over the suspect's mouth after the suspect's hands were zip tied. I really hope that dude is on a watch list somewhere. I don't get a lot of "is it legal if" calls, but the strangest calls I get all the time always start with, yeah, I might need you to, followed by some completely impractical thing, into which the person clearly has not factored the cost of legal services. Yeah, I ma need you to make my doctor's office get me an Uber because my car is broken. No, my dude. I just imagine that these are the entitled people who are like, I have an expensive lawyer and I'm not afraid to call him. Lawyer here. This is kind of the reverse of the question as it is, hey, can I sue somebody for this? Friend of mine has a brother we'll call Craig, and my friend had told me this crazy story about Craig and a friend of his, Dave, who both live in the States, getting catfished by someone in Australia. Craig calls me up one day asking for advice on the following. Craig and Dave are longtime friends who went to elementary school and are now in their late 40s, early 50s. Dave gets divorced. After divorce, Dave meets a woman online who lives in Australia but is originally from Wales and is financially loaded and gorgeous, and 20 years younger than Dave, and they soon fall in love online. She wants to move back to Wales to open up an orphanage for children she will be bringing back from Australia. She and Dave get quite involved and Dave decides he is going to sell all of his belongings and his house in America and move down to Australia to surprise her without telling her. So at roughly the time Dave is going to fly down to Australia, there is some kind of hurricane or other disaster that hits one part of Australia, although not the part Dave's Welsh lady friend lives in. So Dave arrives in Australia and his lady friend is stuck on the other side of the country. Dave meets one of her friends who is a middle-aged woman, roughly Dave's age, who lives in kind of a rundown house in the middle of nowhere. Welsh lady gets tied up for what turns into weeks, but she keeps in contact with Dave. Dave, running low on money, gets Craig to wire him $2,000. Completely coincidentally, the Welsh woman has an amazingly beautiful sister who is a rich and powerful lawyer who gets introduced to Craig online via Dave. Craig and the second Welsh woman fall in love and Craig decides he now wants to move to Australia to help them move the orphans from Australia to Wales. Craig sells a bunch of his personal property and drives 5 hours to meet a private jet sent to him his amazingly beautiful Welsh attorney girlfriend. The plane doesn't show after he's waited in a hotel several days. He then gets a call from Dave. Dave tells him the whole thing is a scam and that the middle-aged woman he has been staying with is actually catfishing both of them with the fake profiles of the Welsh women. Turns out Dave suspected as much when he asked Craig to wire him the money but didn't want to say anything. Craig's legal questions to me. 1. Can I sue the woman that Dave went uninvited to visit in Australia for his $2,000 loan to Dave? And 2. Can I sue the Australian government because shouldn't they be liable for the actions of their citizens? If anyone knows a good catfishing lawyer, let me know and I'll pass the info on to Craig. I have 2, and I will keep it vague. First, client kept coming back to me with pictures of women he found on Facebook asking if she would do in terms of getting a marriage-based green card. He was offering them $2,000 to $5,000. I declined each time. Second, client stole $100K from an elderly man who was in love with his defendant's mother after he pled out and spent months in jail, which by the way he loved because it motivated him to lose weight, was a break from his nagging kids. He returned to our firm and asked how much time he would be looking at if, after he's done probation, he did it all again. Not so much a question, but there is a massive amount of misinformation regarding the law relating to intoxication and consent. Many people toss around this idea of if you're drunk you can't consent. This isn't true. Generally, the law is that you can consent while intoxicated so long as you can appreciate the nature and quality of the act. Basically, you can consent so long as you know you are having sex with the person you thought you were. There may be some weird laws in a few jurisdictions, but this is generally the way it is. Not exactly a would it be a legal hypothetical, but my firm corresponded with a potential client who just seemed totally oblivious. We received an email inquiry about company incorporation and a lawyer responded with a quote and the required details we would need to go forward, including a description of the planned business activities. The potential client sent a reply telling us the company would not be doing any business and it was for tax reasons. We explained that even if it was for tax planning purposes, a company incorporating in our jurisdiction needs to indicate its business activities. Finally, he emailed back to the lawyer saying, "Okay, I think we have a misunderstanding here. I'm looking to do tax evasion." Yup. Not a lawyer but had a co-worker once ask if he would get in trouble for peeling the vehicle inspection sticker off his mother's totaled car and put it on the car he wanted to sell. That couldn't pass inspection. I informed that if he did this, and I found out, I would not only report him to the police myself, but I would kick his butt and make sure he was fired. He was trying to sell a minivan with major frame rust that hadn't had the seatbelts replaced after an accident, so they would not stretch if an accident again had faulty airbags. That had to be kept off or they would literally pop from the slightest pressure. Who buys minivans? People with kids. If this is in PA, the sticker has the VIN written on the back of it. Also, just peeling it off all willy-nilly messes up the hologram. Pretty bad. Saddest, not strangest, an adjustment of status, green card, client, who came to the US from a very patriarchal, very Muslim country who waited until we were almost done with the form to mention that he was charged with rape in the US. No, it wasn't a crime, though, so we didn't have to worry. His victim was his wife, and she must have been on her period to throw such a fit to call the police. I hope he gets deported. Fuckface. My mom, a lawyer, got asked over the phone under what circumstances could he shoot his neighbor. She didn't answer him. Ianal, but I worked in a law office that dealt with property disputes briefly. There was this guy that had been evicted from his condo with no notice because it was bought without his knowledge by a new company he was leasing. I overheard the company rep ask the lawyer if they could write up a new lease with new rent and everything for him after evicting. The lawyer just stared at them lol. Obligatory, not a lawyer. I was on a police ride along once where we had to respond to a 911 call from a man in an SRO asking if it was okay for him to stab someone if they tried to come into his house without his permission. He wouldn't answer the door, so we had to go in without his permission. He pulled a knife on the cops and I stood crying in a hallway. Because I'm soft, everyone was okay in the end. They took him to a hospital. I remember the cops in America had to remind people that it wasn't legal to shoot on sight the people dressed as clowns. I mean, that should have been obvious. There were some sightings in my neighborhood. Clowns tapping on people's car window outside their homes. Clowns knocking on doors at 1 AM. Standing in the park at night a block from my house. I saw that one. Not a lawyer, but worked at a legal organization in an office near reception, so I overheard most of the conversations. A woman claimed that someone she knew, I forget the relationship, somehow stole her cat and was now taunting her with photos of the cat that said ha ha ha, I have your cat, and she wanted to know if it was legal for her to enter the apartment by any means necessary to retrieve the cat. I know that sounds like a prank, but if it was, she was pretty dang convincing in how distraught she sounded. Honestly, the place is a magnet for drama and crazy, so it really wasn't surprising to get a call like this. Needless to say, she couldn't be helped. The org doesn't handle those types of issues and was referred elsewhere. In first semester of law school, a very annoying girl asked if she could sue the school for moral damages after being shushed by colleagues for talking in class. A family member once seriously asked if it would be illegal to burn down his own house, because it would be cheaper than having it demolished, and it was his own house. Yak now. Yes, it would be illegal to literally set fire to the Capitol. He can ask the fire department to do a controlled burn of it. Apparently it's allowable and cheaper than demolishing, though it still costs money. Question: what if I see something that I wanna take and it belongs to someone else? Then you will be arrested. But what if I want it more than the person who has it? Still illegal. That doesn't follow. No, I want it more, sir. Do you understand me? What are you laughing at? What? I can't have a discussion with this gentleman? Not a lawyer, but I work with them. A debtor asked if it would be illegal to pay with a stolen checkbook that they stole, because they knew for sure it had the amount of money they needed to pay off. Buddy, how freaking dumb. OMG. Finally, something I can answer. Obligatory, not a lawyer but an articling student. Lawyer in 8 months, and I work in the family law field. A client was telling me about her husband who is emotionally and financially abusive. I asked if he was physically abusive at any time and her reply was no, but is it illegal if I lie and say that he was? I was a little stunned since I'm totally new and this was my first one-on-one with a client. I had to tell her what perjury was and its implications, as well as the fact that the opposing party can't question our pleadings through deposition. My dad was an attorney. Whenever I called his office, I'd come up with crazy scenarios to ask his secretaries about before I asked them to put him on the line. Some highlights include coming in and finding a new secretary who didn't know who I was. I told her I needed an attorney ASAP because the cops had searched my basement that morning. She didn't need to worry because I did a good job of chopping up the bodies so they didn't find anything. But I figured I needed an attorney. She said he was busy, then freaked out when I just walked back to his office. Called once asking if it was illegal for the cops to confiscate livestock you were hypothetically having relations with, since that's my personal property. We lived in a rural area and unfortunately that was one of the more believable calls. Called and asked if it was a reasonable defense if someone had relations with an underage girl who was only underage because we crossed a state line into a different time zone on the eve of her birthday that had put her at the age of consent. The funny thing is, those weren't even the craziest calls we got at his practice, and they never knew if I was putting them on or if it was a legit client. The best call I ever took when I worked there was a lady who was going to call the local news team because her son was still in jail and clearly my dad hadn't done his job. I looked up the client and told her she was welcome to call the local news and tell them her son was in jail for beating up and robbing his neighbor, an 80-something-year-old woman. That time zone one is one I think about. In my experience, 95% of the time they already know the answer, and about 50% of the time they've already violated the law, and about 10% of the time they haven't violated the law they're asking me about. But in my questioning to get to the bottom of things, they've violated some other law in the process of violating or trying not to violate the law they originally asked me about. Strangest though? Two completely separate people asking about the legality of sex with a machine robot in a 2-week span. You do you, robot lovers. I had a stumper for my lawyer friend that he said was pretty strange. So I freaking hate people who run red lights at the last second. When I was walking to work every day, I almost got killed weekly. My question was, if I see a car coming in fast, see the light turn red, then lunge forward towards the crosswalk like I'm about to jump in front of this car that's running the light, and they swerve and crash, am I at fault? Am I in trouble because I tried to make them crash? Or are they in trouble for running a red light? I should be able to move quickly into a crosswalk, right? After all, I have right of way. His conclusion is that it probably wouldn't hold up in court. Oh well. After all, I have right of way. You'd have I had right of way engraved on your tombstone. That's what you'd have. Obligatory. I'm not a lawyer, but I do have to go to continuing education regarding laws about the ethical and legal accounting of monies given to charity. The amount of people in those ethics classes asking really specific hypothetical questions about blatant money laundering type actions is too dang high. But so what if someone, but not my org, was depositing money for someone who made it under the table and then hired them and paid them out of the account? If we keep all that under $10K per transaction, that's legal, right? Freaking no, it isn't, Shelia. People keep posting amazing questions but don't explain the law according to the question. One of the biggest blue ball threads I've read. Not me, but my lawyer buddy is right next to me. Would it be illegal hypothetically to have sex with a mannequin? Ha. Ianal, but a co-worker, with whom I rarely work with, warned me about traveling to Iceland. I would watch out if I were you. In Iceland, any man can legally punch you in the face, without consequence, if he says it's cuz wants your wife for himself. Sigh. Critical thinking is rarer than you think. I once had a client tell me he was going to invite his crazy ex over and shoot her as she came in the door because that would be okay, right? When I told him no, that would lead to a murder charge and conviction, he said he was sure I could get him off. Not a lawyer, but a close relative of mine recently got let go from a job for being pulled over on the job and arrested for driving on a suspended license. Part of the terms of his job, a driving license was mandatory. He then attempted to sue them and he couldn't understand why no one he contacted would represent him. The question wasn't exactly like would it be illegal, but rather and what would happen if the cow died. We were talking about property in Roman law, so there were actually some cows involved, but the question was still a bit odd. Roman law, you have 2 cows. I can't be the only one that remembers the list or government types as explained by cow ownership. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.